Good afternoon or morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this podcast provided by YOUmanity Education. I am joined today by Dr. Paul Browning, who is the Managing Director of Vividus. For those who aren't on LinkedIn, as much as some people, I strongly suggest you jump on, you follow the Vividus page. There's a number of groups, conversations you can be a part of, just to help you stay abreast of some of the challenges and some of the opportunities in education. In addition, there's vividus.com, and you can also join their YouTube page, which I'm sure is going to be receiving some significant video updates as the program continues to develop and reach what I believe will be a global audience. I've actually worked with Paul previously many years ago on a project across Queensland. In fact, I think it was Australia-wide, and I am very excited to be able to pick the brains of an individual that has already made a difference in education. Our topic today is data. I say data, Australians say data. That is an ongoing joke and battle that I face on a daily basis. At the same time, at the core, I believe it's at the heart of what education can be about in terms of supporting growth, looking after our learners and giving them the best opportunities in life. And we'll explore some of those questions a little later today. But now over to Paul. Paul, would you like to take the opportunity? Vividus is a brand new venture. It's already kicking huge goals in terms of the things that I'm reading being produced by your team. Do you just want to share a little bit about what Vividus is and what's its mission, what's its purpose?
Well, Richard, yeah, it's a great pleasure to actually talk to you today. So thank you very much for that chance. I'm thinking as you talk about data and data, do you say scones?
Well, that's a good question. I've got to say scone because it's my favorite joke. What's the fastest dessert in the world? Scone. So, even if I want to say scone, I can't.
Do you put your cream on first or your jam on first?
Well, I had high tea on the weekend. It was cream them jam. So I just want to.
Oh, well,
half the audience is going to switch off already.
What I love about the UK is the clotted cream, and you don't get that in Australia. So, but we digress, really. I'm avoiding the question. I've been a typical politician. Vividus is, if you think of Vividus as a learning activation model, so we have lots of learning activation models out there, or teaching and learning frameworks, universal design for learning, or dimensions of learning, or project-based learning, visible learning, habits of the mind. They're all learning activation models. Vividus is the only learning activation model that you'll find anywhere in the world that has been specifically designed to activate creative intelligence. Why is creative intelligence important, you ask? Well, you didn't, but I'm going to tell you anyway, Richard. We live in an AI era, and AI is only going to influence more and more parts of our lives. It's going to change everything that we know, including employment. And the new jobs that are emerging need high levels of creative intelligence. World Economic Forum has said this: the number one skill that companies are looking for is creative intelligence or creative thinking. And yet schools are really good at conditioning it out of young people. So that is our motivation for creating this learning activation model, Vividus. It is also the only learning activation model that we have built onto a digital AI-enhanced platform, which means all sorts of things. We can reduce teacher workload at the same time as activating creative intelligence, but we can also gather huge amounts of really interesting, we're going to call it data or data? Data. Let's go data. Yeah, so we're really excited about the opportunity of transforming education in every school across the globe.
That is a big mission, right? In terms of everything you're trying to achieve, there's a lot in there. It was actually thanks to the Vividus page on LinkedIn that I accessed the PISA report around creativity in schools, and reading through that was truly fascinating, and it, supporting that work and that belief that creativity is something that the employers out there on a global scale are looking for, and it's going to be really interesting to see how we measure that going forward.
It is. It's a higher order cognitive skill. And at the moment, we don't have instruments to actually measure those different skills. We've only got standardized tests to measure what the kid knows, how they're able to read, write that up, or how they achieve at the Year 12 level. That's the only data that we've actually really got. But at Vividus, we've worked really hard with the University of Melbourne, a collaboration with them, to design assessment rubrics so we can actually assess creative intelligence, a child's ability to think creatively, and then we can report on those skills. So that's the really exciting piece in terms of transformational learning in classrooms. Once teachers realise that they're assessing something different other than NAPLAN and ATAR, they're actually assessing higher order cognitive skills as well. It's going to change their activity because you measure what you value and you value what you measure. That's the power of the transformation, really. And yes, Richard, it's a big vision, but heck, why not have a big vision? Let's give it a crack, I say, and see where we land.
Look, I accept that fully. Let's take it back a notch then. And before we actually started recording today, I really, I guess, verbalized that I'm a data advocate. I'm one of those passionate geeks who loves Microsoft Excel. I would dare say my wife is one of the best Microsoft Excel users in education in Queensland, and it has absolutely underpinned my career, whether it's NAPLAN, whether it's ATAR. Regardless of what it is, I love it. I must acknowledge there are absolutely challenges behind it, and it's not the be all and end all. I wanted just to ask you for what are the positives? If you look at NAPLAN, if you look at ATAR, if you look at ASAPAT testing, the AAS testing, which used to be Orwell, what are the positives in standardized data tests in your mind?
I guess I need to be clear, Richard. I agree with you. I'm perhaps not as passionate about data as you might be. It doesn't really get me up in the morning and get me motivated. And Excel I love, but it's not my favourite piece of software. But I am an academic, so I do have a degree, and so data is really important when you're researching. Evidence, basically, evidence for what's actually happening, and so you can actually see the effect, cause and effect, etc., etc. So data does have significant value, and I enjoy data and looking at the evidence. And certainly when I was a principal, before we made any decisions around things that we wanted to implement into a school, I was really keen to know the evidence of the impact it would have. I didn't want to be risk in the sense of just give it a crack. I wanted to know what the evidence was behind it. Now, I was a principal when NAPLAN was first introduced back in the early 2000s, and I was a principal in the ACT. And those days, the data was, well, it still is, but it was really very, very useful in the sense that when the school received the data, it gave us some really good intelligence or insights in terms of how the students were performing, how we were delivering the curriculum, what effects was that your different teaching methods having. The problem with the data with NAPLAN is become a weapon. It's been weaponized. It's politicized. And so what I'm dead against is the publication of the data on my school's websites, for example, and then the media actually taking that data and creating league tables. And because then it's created this culture of fear where schools think if we don't achieve on these sorts of measures that are going to be publicized in the media and then we're going to be chastised by politicians and parents, then we better lift our game. But in lifting their game, you'll find if you go into schools and ask the question, you'll find lots of schools have found ways around it. So, yeah, for example, we know that Johnny is not very good at reading. So, Johnny, you stay home when the NAPLAN tests are actually on, because the implication is you're not going to do very well and therefore you're going to affect our results. Or teachers spend weeks and weeks and weeks teaching for the test. They drill until the kids are bored senseless, so they perform well on the NAPLAN test. And so if the whole focus is that data set, then it really influences or has a negative impact on all the other aspects of what education should be about. And one of those key aspects, I would argue, is the development of those higher order cognitive skills like creative intelligence, but also the development of a person's character. Who they are as a person and what they're going to value and believe, and the impact that they would like to have in the world when they finish school. Some of these sets of data we don't have access to, but if we did, perhaps we might spend a greater focus on those areas.
No, I think you're spot on. I agree with you entirely. As much as I love looking at the data sets, our league table scheming, and as a school leader, waiting for them to be published, I dreaded it. And what was really interesting I would actually see an uptick in enrollments and applications to the college once the league table would be published because the results were strong. And that's really dangerous. It's really dangerous.
It is
Why
dangerous.
are you coming to a school?
Yeah, and I'd probably suggest that For parents, if that's the only data that they're getting about the quality of the school, then of course there's going to be an uptick in the enrolments. And of course, schools are going to work really hard to actually improve those results one way or another, let's say, not necessarily for elevating practice and good teaching, but gaming the situation. But what I found when I was the headmaster at St. Paul's School is when you start talking to parents about what really matters, the idea of NAPLAN or even ATAR falls back to the back of their minds. If you start saying to them, we're entering an era of accelerations, a time where AI is going to transform everything that we know. NAPLAN data and even ATAR is not that important. Every child needs to be able to read, write, and add up, and they need to perform academically and have good content knowledge. But it's what they do with that content knowledge, how they apply it, how they generate new ideas, how they can identify complex problems and solve those problems is what's really going to matter in today's world. It's not, can they get 99.95 on on the ATAR? Really? That's not what it's about, or not what it should be about. But unfortunately, for many schools and for politicians, that's basically what it's all about.
Well, it's a measure, isn't it? A league table is a league table. It is a measure. I agree with that entirely. I think NAPLAN actually serves as a phenomenal foundation. Its core purpose, it's the genuine, authentic reason for establishing something like a NAPLAN, even something like an ATAR, I actually think was done with the best intentions in heart. And I think it actually comes now to people need to know about it. We need to take the opportunity to explore it. What does it tell us? Push the other stuff about league tables off to the side. We know it's there at the moment, but actually it is a useful resource that can help support moving students to some of those creative, critical thinking skills that you're talking about, particularly the work at Vividus. So it's it comes down to how it's used in school. Same as the knowledge. How does a kid use knowledge? How does a school use data?
Yep. And certainly for parents, like NAPLAN is really handy because every parent wants to know how their child is actually going with those core skills. And they do need to read, write, and add up. And as you just said, it's how that data is actually used. If it's used to support students' learning and support schools are getting better at their practice, that's a great thing. But if it's used as a stick to criticise, that's where we've fallen into a problem. The whole focus has shifted onto just those two sets of data, NAPLAN and ATAR.
That flows beautifully to our question 2, and that is how do we begin to uncouple what is it that needs to happen, do you think, to help us move in a different direction and break some of those current trends? We've got the positives. What do you think's next for us?
Well, I think personally, we love data. We live in a data-rich world, and more data is being produced every single day. And when people data mining and data analysts, data is here to stay. What data are we actually going to focus on? And the problem with schools at the moment is the only real data sets that people can get are those standardized testing. So PISA is one of the data sets, but obviously it's not mandatory with every school across Australia, and forbid that they do make it mandatory. But again, it's a data set that people like to focus on, and PISA has actually now recognised that creativity is on the rise and its importance in young people's minds. And so their first creativity measure was introduced last year, and the report came out earlier this year, and that was quite fascinating. So as we look to introduce, or we need to introduce, other measures that add value to the education of the young person, if we need to accept that we need to move education away from these very blunt instruments or focuses on what education should be about, because they are very old school. They're not really what young people need to have in the future. They need to be able to think creatively. They need to be people of good character. So if we're going to focus on those, then we need to develop measurement tools to measure those sorts of things, because that will actually shift our focus and give us a broader picture or a more balanced view of education. And that's one of the motivations behind what we do at Vividus, because we strongly believe in creative intelligence and the need for young people to be able to think creatively. We've worked with the University of Melbourne to create assessment tools that will provide data about how a child is actually growing in that capacity. And so as soon as a teacher understands that you're going to be assessing this, then you automatically shift their focus. The other beautiful thing about the Vividus platform is at the moment, school leaders, principals, like I was a school principal, the only data that you really have to interrogate is, I would call, post data like that plan
Lag
or
time. Yeah.
lag time. So it's too late to do anything about it. Whereas the Vividus platform is a platform that teachers use to plan for learning. And as they're planning for learning, it's professionally developing them and changing their activity to teach for creative thinking. And that as they assess students on those key capabilities there, then the data that's coming in that a principal can actually see is they'll be able to see the quality of teaching in every single classroom. They'll be able to see what curriculum has been covered and what's not. They'll be able to see which departments are activating creative intelligence and which are not. They'll be getting live data about the culture of the school. And we know that school cultures with high levels of trust have a significant impact on student learning. So all of this live data is coming into the system, and the principals can actually see, and then they can use that data to make some really informed decisions about school improvement. Where do they need to spend their money or their time or their energy and support for individual teachers or groups of teachers to really focus on what's most important? And that's the pedagogy, the learning in the classroom. How can we actually support the learning here and now, not post results, but as we're teaching? And so the data that will be coming in through the Vividus platform is data that principals have never, ever been able to access before, but would love to see.
Three things really jump out to me there. And when I was leading the school there, I craved that data. I love it, and I would make the best out of whatever lag data I had. And the sooner I got it, pat test intermediate, great. I can make a difference. You're really touching on, I believe, the principles of assessment for learning. You know, when I first moved to Australia from the United Kingdom, I did a presentation to a team, head of department team, and I called it AFL all the way through because that's what it's known as. I would suggest internationally. So you can imagine the first 10 minutes in Australia giving a presentation on AFL.
Yep, they would have loved you. They
It was
had no
really
idea what you're
difficult.
talking about.
It was difficult to get him back on topic. I could tell you that, Paul. It was a challenge. But you're talking about the principles of AFL where actually you're front loading your work, and Australia still hasn't really got to that where I've worked with people who've created assessment instruments 2 weeks before the assessment instrument is delivered. And you can't do that because what have you been teaching? You're actually creating an instrument to measure what you've taught. Then, whereas you should be creating this instrument at the start, the outset, and that's where, and I dare say it probably didn't quite take off, but gamification in education and people really trying to look at assessment in a different way, and that I think that's a little bit of what you're talking about there.
It is, Richard. AFL. What did you say it stood for?
Assessment for learning.
Yeah, exactly. Precisely right. It is, and that's what it should be about: assessment for learning. It's part of the journey and the process.
And I think Australia is really good at AOL, which is assessment of learning. I don't think that's not the same thing. It's not the same thing. And you imagine the richness that comes out of the data in different ways for those sets. If you've got AFL, assessment for learning, for the Australian listeners, if you've got assessment for learning, then all of the data that's coming out is actually coming back to you on the work you're doing. And that's the power of formative and summative assessment. Once the instrument is created, you're working through that process. Now, in theory, I think it makes a lot of sense. I don't think anyone's going to listen and go, oh, that's ridiculous and wrong. I think another challenge we face right now, and we've talked about this previously, is it's really hard. In many ways, you're asking teachers to do more. That's what people would say to me when I was leading a school. If I wanted to make a big change, I would have to, in the back of my mind, think, is this a conversation I can have? Right now, I've had 3 conversations, that balance. Teacher burnout is a discussion. Teacher shortage is a discussion. I hate the term, but I must accept it. Change fatigue is a discussion. So all those things are out there. How do you think Vividus is going to support teachers, let's say 2 years down the line? A school has implemented it. How is it helping?
We've been very cognizant of all those issues, and kind of come back a step, Richard, before I talk about that. Yeah, we were talking about assessment just a minute ago. A whole part of the teacher workload problem and issue, and I'm sorry, teachers, if you're listening to me, but part of it is self-imposed because teachers tend to assess too much what did you describe it? Post-learning
Yeah.
assessment of learning, Richard,
Yeah.
and creating a huge marking load on themselves, which is ridiculous, which then it also negatively impacts student well-being too, because they're constantly under pressure for assessment rather than actually enjoying learning. So that's an issue as well. Teacher workload is a really complex issue. And I think part of the problem or the reason why teachers are over assessing is just that fear that they need to actually produce good results. And so if they keep assessing, then hopefully, yes, it's a bit of a nonsense. It's not, it doesn't work. But if you over assess students, then maybe I'll improve my marks and save myself from any criticism because I haven't achieved good things for the kids and yada, yada, yada. So that we've got this system where we've got everything pressuring down on teachers and students rather than actually us getting back to what we love the most, and that's learning, and for teachers, teaching, really. And another big problem for teachers these days is the huge increase in administrative workload. And I read a report the other day that came out of one of the universities in Australia that the NDIS system, which for all its great things, the implementation of that in schools has increased administrative workload by 90% for teachers.
Without a doubt. NCCD is, again, I'm going to go out on a limb here and say it's well-intentioned. I can see
well-intentioned, yeah.
When I read the rationale in the document, the business case behind it, which I've done recently for something else, I was like, wow, that actually makes perfect sense. For the load-ins, for the funding, I get it. However, if you're a teacher and all of a sudden you've got to record 10 weeks of adjustment over a 12-month period, and you've got to document all those different things and portfolios, and the word is audit. I spoke to a principal just last week who was just audited, and that caused them significant stress. They're coming in, and the line is, if you can't prove what you've claimed, you will give us the money back. What a horrible situation to be in. You've got redundancies, you've got to change capital expenditure, all of that. But again, it's amazing how something so pure and good to support the unique needs of each individual learner has become this obstacle to teachers being the brilliant people that they generally are.
Yeah, exactly. And so that's a workload issue for teachers. So we've got over-assessment, we've got the burden of NCCD. We've also got other issues like there's no time to collaboratively plan. Schools are always trying to find opportunities to get teachers together to collaboratively plan, and teachers would love to do that, but there's no time. And there's no time because there's all these other things piled on top of them as well. And then it's really interesting. Schools, as I've moved out of schools, I'm more into, I guess, the real world, let's say. Schools don't have access to really good tools. So when teachers plan for learning, what they need is all over the place. So the national curriculum's over here, the template that they need to plan on is over here, the NCD stuff is over here. They don't have a source of truth for that. They're entering data in multiple places because there's all these different platforms within a school as well. No one product actually meets the needs of every aspect of a school because they're complex systems and organisations. So teachers, in terms of their actual burden of planning, even with that, is quite problematic. So with Vividus, our core purpose is to activate creative intelligence. That's our core purpose. But in doing so, we recognise that's going to be a change, as you say, and schools, as a principal, change management or change fatigue was something that was always said to me, but we live in a world where change is constant. Like it's the only constant, death and taxes and change, really. But it's how you support people along that journey. And we're entering a period of change which is like none other in human history. The change is so rapid now we can't actually even keep up. So it's kind of like, why bother? But we do need to support teachers as best we possibly can. So Vividus, activating creative intelligence, the platform has been designed also to reduce teacher workload significantly. And that's one of our goals too. So as teachers use the platform to plan for learning, it's a learning activation model, not a LMS. It's a learning activation model. It's a tool for teachers, tool for them to teach better, to teach for creative intelligence. But as they plan for learning, it's linked to Akara. Everything is in there that they actually need to develop learning. They can, because it's a digital platform, they can collaborate with colleagues wherever they are at whatever time. They can even collaborate across schools to develop units of work. All the data for the learner adjustments is put into that platform by a single point of truth at the school. Somebody's in charge of learning support, for example. And so a teacher, when they plan for their class, all the learner adjustments are right there in their planning template. And all they need to do is to tag them. Click, 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 click. That's it. So all the evidence that they need to collect when it comes to audit time is done just with those simple, quick clicks. So I reckon we can reduce that sort of workload by 90%. You're also then building into that plan assessment for learning.
Yeah. Well,
Woo! How about
woo!
that? By tagging, this is going to be a formative piece of assessment. This is summative assessment. And so you're building an assessment. And then if you can, and because you're starting to collaborate and you're seeing the linkages across curriculums, as teachers see visibility of what other people are actually doing as well, you can start to realize that, hey, you know what? If we have one assessment tool for these two subjects, or one assessment piece for these two subjects, because we're covering pretty much the same thing, we can reduce our assessment load, which is a assessment of learning, massive, which would be fantastic. And then as teachers start using the platform, they can see the opportunities and the possibilities to do interdisciplinary learning or transdisciplinary learning, which again really opens significant possibilities for learning for the students and the teachers, putting the love back into teaching and learning. And that's what lights my fire is. And
Yeah,
most teachers,
I have to say I love that sentence. Put it that just I think most teachers are called to the profession. I think it's to sign up for it and to give yourself fully to it. You know, it takes a lot. It's hard work, but as it should be. You're educating the future of the world. Like all these things that are created, whether it's artificial intelligence, whether it's the Vividus platform, is come from years of education, learning, and growth. And I think we are supporting the next generation in doing that. And we should be passionate and advocates for those people. But their love is lost in lots of cases. And I do think there is an amazing link there to the work on trust and culture in schools, because to let go is hard, and you've got to be comfortable that letting go is not going to get you into trouble, or everyone's going to pay a mortgage. So there is that fear element does sort of sit there. You mentioned earlier, you talked a little bit about artificial intelligence. I dare say I've spoken more about AI in the last 12 months than I have at any other point in my life, unless I was discussing Terminator 2. Now, for somebody of my age, I mean, Terminator 2 is a frightening indictment of what artificial intelligence could do to the world. But I do accept it is not actually an academic research paper on which we should base our decision-making purposes. There was an article which you published or you shared today on LinkedIn, which really talked about, and I think you've sort of said it a bit today, education is not letting go of education 120 years ago. Everything we're talking about is still fitting in with what is school, what is education. Does Vividus change that? Is that sort of a goal for the platform?
Look, I think it was an interesting question from a guy in Canada I've been talking to, Ed Brooker, and he posed a question, and somebody else published an article as well. I can't remember, Richard, who it was, but asked a Minister for Education, what is education? And they really struggled to actually answer that question, and basically came up with some sort of term around, it's about exams, it's about tests, it's about standardised results, so all that sort of stuff. It's about achievement. And I think, sadly, education has been politicised because successful governments see it as an economic means. The higher the education standard of our population, the greater the economic return we're going to see. And I think I saw something yesterday too, that the new education minister wants to increase the number of people with university qualifications by 50% by 2050, which 2050 sounds like a long way off, but it's not really. So if that's the goal, that's quite scary, I would say. So a lot of people actually stop and think about what is an education, what is it actually about? And we talk about 120 years just there, Richard, but if you go back to times like Aristotle and the great Greek philosophers, education wasn't just about that. It was actually about, and a good friend of mine, Nigel Grant, has been writing about it recently, it's about acquiring wisdom. And what is wisdom? Well, wisdom is about knowing when to do the right thing. It's about knowing what your abilities are and what they're not. It's about making a positive difference to other people's lives. So if education's about that, it's about how to apply what you've learned to make the world a better place.
Mm.
It's not necessarily economic output. It's about making people's lives better, making a contribution. And Yong Zhao, I might be referring to that article. He made some really interesting points in his article today about AI and education. A lot of people talking about how can we embed AI into the current education system,
Yep.
which is interesting, but really I think pointless because, yeah, you're not changing the system. And it's the system that actually needs to change. It needs to change its focus. If you're embedding AI to teach young people better ways of understanding or knowing content, to the detriment of these important higher order cognitive skills and character development traits, then you're basically just doing the same old with new tools. It's like introducing a calculator to teach maths. Really? We used to be able to add up in our head, then we used a calculator, now we use AI. Like, we're doing the same thing, but just with another tool. As Yong has pointed out there in his article, we need to shift what we do with schools to ensure that young people are able to identify and solve complex problems. AI can't identify complex problems. AI cannot reflect our humanity either. So what's going to be most important is what makes us human as we move into this AI era. And you talk about the Terminator. There's a great movie out recently called The Creator. And I would argue that technology is born in science fiction. So as soon as
Yep.
somebody comes up with an idea and puts it into a film, as far-fetched as it might be, like Star Trek's teleportation, we're trying to find ways of actually solving that problem and making it work because we think, oh, that's cool.
Yes. Yeah. I'm still waiting for a lightsaber. I'm still waiting.
What would that be? I reckon it'll come. It's going to come pretty soon. Back to the Future as well. But the Creator is interesting. And if you look on YouTube at the moment where they've integrated OpenAI with robotics, it is quite frightening how fast things are actually moving. Like, just Google OpenAI and robotics and have a look at what's actually happening there at the moment. And The Creator, the film, is about the creation of a whole new species, robotics and AI, just like what we see there. It's a whole new species. And the question at the end of the day is, well, what makes us human?
Yeah, and I've actually seen that film. I actually watched it about a month ago, and I thought it was fantastic because it was almost a step on from a film Elysium with Matt Damon in, because that was very much a physical upgrade sort of concept, whereas this moves into that cyborg realm. Well, actually, I'm a person too, and I got feelings, even though I was created in a different way. And Nick Burnett has been creating his Substack on becoming humane, which is with AI in the spelling, and it's just fascinating to see how people are exploring it and look in different ways. And you actually made the point it can be scary, but who's teaching the AI? But I think that goes in another direction. And AI is great for data, for analyzing, for supporting, giving you. It's a time saver. It can be a time saver, and it comes down to the reason.
Yeah, exactly. In our business, we're using AI every day. It's fantastic. Like, it is a huge time saver. Professor Nigel Crook is another really interesting person to talk to. He's got a great book called The Moral Machine, and he's looking at AI and morality and how to integrate morality into AI, and says that we actually need to do this. So he's coming from a Christian worldview, but the encouraging thing in that is he says that AI will not destroy us. It won't be the last thing we invent, but it's here to stay. We need to accept that. But it does, coming back to the conversation, Richard, it does really provoke what we currently do in all spheres of life. It's going to cause change. And as Yong says in his article today, will we need teachers when you can get AI to personalised tutor an individual student about content? So again, if you Google OpenAI or ChatGPT-4 tutors boy with Pythagoras, it's extraordinary what's actually happening there. And it leaves you thinking, why do I need to send my child to school if AI can actually be a personal tutor, adjusting the learning for that child's needs? But again, it's just about the content delivery.
Massive. I'm so passionate about that content versus knowledge utilization.
Yeah, exactly. And that's where schools need to realize that it's what you do with that content, how you use it, how do you generate new ideas, how do you identify problems. This is all creative intelligence. And then the moral decisions about how do you use that content to make a difference. So the
Mm.
development of character as well. So schools need to accept that it has to be about a holistic education. It has to have not just a focus on their academic development, but also their skills and dispositions and their character traits. And so if we're going to do that, we need to find data sets that measure all of those. So we broaden the focus and we're focused on that holistic development, not just this narrow view.
I love that. Character. I think character is a word there. That's a key word, right? If you
It
talk
is,
about
yeah.
how do we remain humane, how do we look at moral purpose and the creation, development of character, that for me, if you're asking the question, what is education?
Yep,
Those words have to be in the answer. They
they
have to be.
do.
And
Totally.
if they're not, you might be the top of a league table. You might not fear particular data sets. Are you meeting the core purpose and reason that actually you embarked on a career in education? I'm actually not sure. I'm actually not
Yeah.
sure, Jim.
No, I don't think so. I think sadly teachers would all agree with that as well. Teachers become teachers, like I became a primary teacher, and you become a teacher because you want to make a difference. You want, and it's a real privilege to make a difference to young people's lives,
Yes, it is.
albeit a small difference. But unfortunately, I think teachers become disillusioned because they're led to believe that education is just about these narrow things,
Mm.
these slices of what it means to be a great teacher. And because it's been narrowed and they've been constrained to do just that, the joy of teaching is gone.
Yeah.
So it's disappeared. So if we broaden that again, teachers can rediscover what they love.
Yeah.
The child lighting up in the classroom because they've suddenly got it, or they've come to you because they've generated this new idea that, man, you didn't even think that was possible. How did you come up with that? That's extraordinary. Yeah,
Yeah.
come and have a look at what John's actually done. Yeah,
Yeah.
celebrate that. Yeah, or the act of kindness, just a simple act of kindness a young person's actually done to somebody else because they've been learning and from you as a role model in the classroom. That's what makes teaching
They're
joyful.
the beautiful moments. The beautiful moments. And we want teachers to go home at night and say, "You'll never guess what happened today," as opposed
Exactly.
to, "I do not want to talk about it."
Yeah,
Like
exactly. And
two
tomorrow we've
metrics.
got the NCCD audit, and gee, I've got so much paperwork to do tonight. I'm finding all that evidence.
And it's interesting. You got two people here who are not in schools at the moment, Paul. I think that's
Yeah,
really significant in itself. And
I believe you.
whether it's with whether it's
I look
humanity,
at
that that drive to
yes,
make a difference is huge.
yes. Yeah, well, Richard, on that, I mean, I'd love to still be a principal. I miss schools immensely, and the bits I miss is the interaction with the students and the community. They're the bits I really miss. I don't miss all the administration that went along with that. But not being in a school now, after 25 years of being a principal, I see a real opportunity to have a broader impact on education, not just in one single school. So my colleagues and I at Vividus, we're using our years and years of expertise to share what we've learned and developed with academics across the world to make a bigger difference. So while we don't get to interact with students each day, we
Yeah.
miss that. We are near a school, and you can see the window behind me. They walk down past the window at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. I feel like opening up the window and saying, "Pull your socks up, boy," or "Tuck your shirt," or "Get off your mobile phone." But I think I probably get in trouble from the principal up the road about that. But our goal is to transform education globally. That's what we really want to do by activating creative intelligence in the minds of every single person.
That's beautiful. I love it. I reckon I could talk to you for hours and hours and hours, but people aren't going to listen for hours and hours and hours. But they might. You're a pretty
Unless we
interesting
start
guy, I
talking about
suppose, Paul. So,
we might talk
um,
about AFL. I reckon if we start talking about AFL, they might
don't
suddenly
even.
switch on. Yeah, no.
It won't stand the test of time in this podcast, but I'm really interested to see how the selections for the Lions go this weekend. But
Yeah.
that's going to be lost. If somebody's listening in 2 weeks' time, they'll know the answer. So I'm not
Yeah, they
going
were.
to delve into that. I think my
It's that post data, isn't it?
yeah, it's
That
post.
assessment of
Yeah.
it.
Well,
Yes.
they must be doing some of it in training. I would have thought, but
Yeah.
we'll see. My
Yeah.
last question, I suppose, opportunity, particularly, I think, focusing on creative. If you had to say in a short response, how is Vividus going to help measure creativity, or even if more general, how is Vividus going to harness data in education for the benefit of young people? What would you say?
I would say Vividus is about changing the activity of the teachers in the classroom, changing the focus of learning to teach for creative intelligence, as well as all these other things. And the assessment data and all the data that's been gathered as teachers plan for that learning is really going to make a significant difference. Really exciting stuff.
That's lovely. I genuinely look forward to seeing how it grows and it develops. And probably more important, I wish you the very best of luck. I think the core purpose of education and people becoming teachers actually sits at the heart of the work that you're trying to do. And if it starts in Australia, great. If it's global, great. But I think what really matters is a teacher and a child somewhere is going to benefit from the work that you're doing. And I think that's
Yes.
I think that's really wonderful.
And Richard, all that thinking started back with Learning Frontiers. Learning Frontiers was wanting to challenge the current state of education. What was that, 12 years ago, Richard?
Yeah, do you know what? It was probably yeah, it was about 11 years ago actually,
Yeah,
and
exactly.
yeah, sitting there listening to all you Australians talk funny, and it was nice because every time I opened my mouth, people had to listen because they had no idea what I was saying. My accent has changed a lot in 10
Yeah.
years, and my friends back at home. Oh, honestly, I can't jump on a video call with them because it's literally 30 minutes of abuse for how I speak and how I say things. Whereas I probably sound super Welsh to so many Australians.
You do
But
sound very Welsh, Richard. You're never going to lose that accent,
well, I hope
unfortunately.
not. I work really hard. I really do.
Yeah.
So, Paul Vividus is on LinkedIn. Great for joining, and some subgroups on there as well for education leaders and other professionals coming together to share ideas. Vividus.com is the website, and your YouTube channel is up and running. And there's a really nice video on there just to help explain the core purpose. You're wearing a great shirt, by the way, in that video. I just wanted to check that out there. And this one too.
I call it
And
my
this one
Vivid
too.
shirt.
Yeah. That brings us to the end of this podcast, ladies and gentlemen, by YOUmanity Education. That was Dr. Paul Browning. We talked about data. We moved into artificial intelligence. And what I really love and was unplanned was how the importance of character, how the importance of moral purpose and the holistic development of children naturally flowed from a conversation about numbers regarding literacy and numeracy. And I think in that, there's a great model, a great example for education could be. Paul, thank you very much. I wish you the very best of luck, you and the team, and I really hope we get to speak again soon.
Terrific. Thank you, Richard.